So our last story for this week's episode is the famous story of Balaam and Balak and the talking donkey. To set the stage, Balaam is a prophet, and he's not in the house of Israel. He's not with the group.
It's interesting you say that because in Hebrew, the word am means people. And Bala means not. So literally his name means he's not of the people, so he's not an Israelite prophet. And the text is just trying to make it clear that God is working with other nations and their prophets to declare truth.
So Balak, who is a Moabite prince or a Moabite king, he's seen what Israel, the camp of Israel, has done with some other neighboring kingdoms and other neighboring cities. And he's a little bit concerned because he's maybe a little smaller than some of the other Canaanite kingdoms. And so he's pleading with Balaam to come and curse Israel for him because he recognizes that there's some power with Balaam. So he sends princes with some gifts. Balaam says, well, let me go and ask the Lord. You can lodge here tonight. And then the next morning he comes and he says, no, I'm not going to do it. God won't let me curse this people. So they go back, and Balak sends even more important people with much bigger bounty of gifts to offer him.
I know that some of us don't think the Bible should be humorous, but I look at this story, and every time I read it, I just laugh a bit. It's just human folly that this guy thinks, if I spend enough money, I will convince a prophet and God to say bad things about God's people. And even Balaam eventually in the text just doesn't seem to understand God's will. And I just find some humor because I even see in my own life, there are times that I want to make something happen and I'm unwilling to really listen to God at times. So there's just a bit of humor here, I think. But ultimately the lesson is when God speaks, listen. Think about Joseph Smith and Martin Harris, okay? How many times did Martin Harris keep upping the ante to get the text of the Book of Mormon to share with his friends? And Joseph Smith finally says, okay, fine. And what happens? Joseph Smith loses the power to translate for a while. The 116 pages get lost. So I see kind of a similar thing going on in this story. Like when God speaks, you don't need to say to him, I'm not sure you spoke properly, God. I expect you to say this. Would you repeat yourself and say it the way I want?
Yeah, it's an interesting turning point in the story if you look at chapter 22, verse 19. When this group shows up again, yet again, with bigger offering of gifts, more important people, rather than saying, I wonder if that size of gift for me is what God was waiting to happen before he says, okay, now I want you to go and curse the children of Israel, my people that I've delivered out of Egypt. It's a turning point because Balaam should have said, no, I've already got the answer and I'm not going to curse these people. But look what happens in verse 19. Now therefore I pray you, tarry ye also here this night, that I may know what the Lord will say unto me more. So he's going to go and ask God again. And God came unto Balaam at night and said unto him, if the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them. Now there's an interesting 3-word addition that the prophet Joseph Smith added to this verse that isn't in all of our footnotes. He adds the words, if thou wilt, in between the word up and the word and. So it reads, and God came unto Balaam at night and said unto him, if the men come to call thee, rise up, if thou wilt, and go with them. It's not God giving him a command. I need you to go with them. It's if you choose to go, you can make that choice, which makes a whole lot more sense in verse 22.
Well, actually, if you look at, but yet the word which I shall say unto thee, that shall do, meaning I expect you to do what I told you to do just a few minutes ago. It's a little confusing the way it's worded here in English, but this phrase here, I expect you to do what I've already commanded you a few verses before.
There you go. And in the morning, Balaam wakes up and he says, I'm going.
So I have sat through too many Sunday school lessons where people have debated whether donkeys can talk. And that is not the point of this lesson. So I just hope that we would never spend any precious Sunday school time debating talking animals. But I want us to think about, what are the qualities of a donkey or a mule? Okay? I think we can all agree that usually donkeys are slow, stubborn, they don't see very well, they don't listen. Like, all these things about donkeys. Nobody ever wants to be called a donkey. I've never known anybody who felt like being called a donkey was a positive thing, because they have all these negative qualities. Now, I don't want to disparage people who are donkey owners, because actually they are quite capable work animals. But for the point of the story, look at what Balaam does. The donkey sees and hears God. Okay? Who does not see God? Who does not hear God? Balaam. Balaam is so stubborn, he's so slow, he doesn't realize that God himself, the euphemism is the angel of the Lord, is standing in the path trying to help Balaam avoid doing something he shouldn't be doing. So the point of this question is, the point of this story is, who is the donkey? And it's Balaam. We shouldn't be like Balaam, who was stubborn and slow to learn. That's one of the main reasons the story is being preserved.
And you look at verse 22 when it kicks into high gear with this phrase, and God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Side note, if we take a quick time out here, if you look at the Hebrew word for adversary against him, the Hebrew word that came from is Satan, which is borrowed over into the New Testament with the title Satan. The angel of the Lord is a Satan. What is a Satan? It's an adversary against somebody. It's somebody who tries to prevent you from going where you're trying to go.
To turn you out of the path. And in this case...
And it worked.
In this case, Balaam was not supposed to be on that path. God was actually purposely trying to turn him to a different path. And Balaam is so stubborn, he gets his foot crushed, trying to force himself on a path he shouldn't be on. I was actually reading this again last night, kind of laughing, the image of Balaam so stubbornly trying to press forward in the face of God, get his foot crushed against the wall. And I wonder, do we ever do this to ourselves?
Yeah, it's fascinating because, as Taylor pointed out, the donkey, he can both see and hear. So in verse 23, he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and he then responds. He leaves that way because he recognizes, I shouldn't be going here. That's when Balaam begins smiting this poor animal, at which point, as Taylor pointed out, verse 25, he crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. So this is the second time. Balaam is so blind. He can't see the angel. He can't see the danger. And he's just upset at this donkey, and he's smiting her. And then, verse 28, the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, What have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times? Now, some people read that verse and think, wow, that has to be one of the most amazing miracles of the Old Testament, that this donkey turns and talks to Balaam. I suggest to you, you've probably heard people talk about this before, that perhaps one of the miracles that's even more remarkable than the fact that the donkey talked to Balaam is the fact that Balaam just talks back to the donkey as if he's talking to a servant or another person.
The story just makes me
laugh. Verse 29, and Balaam said unto the ass, Behold, thou hast mocked me. I would there were a sword in mine hand, for now I would kill thee. He's not thinking very clearly, because think of the money you could make with a talking donkey, but he's going to kill this donkey. It's a funny story, and yet it's a tragic story. And so the donkey talks back to him, and says, Am not I thine ass, upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, Nay. As Taylor pointed out at the beginning, I think this story is here to demonstrate who is the real donkey in this story.
And all of us are donkeys at times. All of us. All of us are stubborn, blind, and don't hear. And I love what happens here, verse 31. The Lord opened the eyes of Balaam. God will do that for all of us. God will work with us where we're at, and he will try to open our eyes and our ears so we can see his presence in our lives and see how he's opening pathways for us or trying to put obstacles in the way that should get us going somewhere else. And Balaam eventually figures this out. I mean, he's not such a long-term donkey that he can't learn. So he has this donkey moment, but he realizes, okay, I'm really grateful that my donkey was humble enough to see the Lord, and I'm going to listen to the Lord. And it turns into the story of where he's been paid all this money to say negative things about the Israelites, and yet we get these incredible blessings that he prophesies to the Israelites in the upcoming verses and chapters.
So to finish off the part of the story with the donkey, if you look at verse 32, it says, And the angel of the Lord said unto him, Wherefore hast thou smitten thine ass these 3 times? Behold, I went out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me. Just as another side note here, that once again, the Hebrew word here in verse 32, I went out to withstand thee. Now it's in a verb form. The word there is satan. So it's not just a noun, it's also used as a verb. I came to withstand you, to satan you, to prevent you from progressing on this path that you've chosen. But
because it was the wrong path.
Because it was the wrong path. Which, by the way, incidentally, maybe that adds a little bit of at least a potential explanation for the experience down the road with Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, where he tells Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Mm-hmm. Maybe he's using this kind of a definition where Peter's trying to stop Jesus from going down to Jerusalem to fulfill his divine purposes, and he's acting in a role of a satan, somebody who is an adversary against me or somebody who's trying to withstand me from going where I need to go, rather than calling Peter, his chief apostle, the title of the chief devil of hell. Maybe there's something there in understanding that story better based on what we know here. So the rest of the story, as Taylor has already alluded, he's shown the house of Israel. Balak takes Balaam to different locations to see the size and the scope and the scale of this group. And he keeps blessing them and blessing them and blessing them. And it makes Balak very upset. And you can read the rest of these.
He's not getting his money's worth.
Yeah, this is not a return on his investment. But isn't it fascinating that Balaam refused to curse them, but he reveals kind of the Achilles heel, if you will, the way to, if you want to destroy them, I can't curse them. But if they're unrighteous and if they're unfaithful and if they turn away from worshiping their God, then they lose God's protection, and that's the way to destroy them. And so what do you get? All the Moabites coming down and encouraging these Israelite men to participate in the idolatrous and adulterous practices of the Moabites, gods and goddesses, and their idol worship.